handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. Very happy that you could be with us. And I want to thank our digital flagship at talkamericaradio.us. And a special thank you to our terrestrial flagship, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM, serving South Georgia. All of those listeners and all of you that are with us, please welcome Michael Pregent, who's an adjunct fellow at the Hudson Institute. He's a Middle East analyst, a former intelligence officer. He served in Desert Storm and in Desert Shield, company commander in Afghanistan in 2002, and certainly a big media contributor because I've been fighting with the schedulers over there at Fox, and not only to get a moment of Michael's time, but it seems this week I've been fighting with several other guests I was supposed to get on. So, Michael, thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Hey, happy to be here. Thanks.
I was very, very happy that we're finally going to give some attention to Afghanistan. For, I don't know, about 3 or 4 years, I've called it the Forgotten War. Are you just as happy as I think I am?
Well, I don't know if happy is the word, but at least we have a commander-in-chief that's listening to his general's recommendations, and that's a good thing. He admitted that he changed his mind on this one.
Yes.
Candidate Trump was against doing any more in Afghanistan and actually talked about pulling out. Well, it's a really simple argument to make. Mr. President, look at Iraq when we pulled out and look what happened. And that was before there were indicators of ISIS in Iraq. And we have indicators. We don't have indicators. We have facts that ISIS is actually on the ground in Afghanistan. So it just changes the whole dynamics. You have to pay attention to it. He listened to his generals. Mattis spent a lot of time there, so did McMaster. And you'd hate to see the sacrifice of those American lives and that treasure to simply leave. And I admit, 16 years is a long time, but that's based on the fact that we change out leadership every year. And you basically take 3 steps forward, 4 steps backwards. And, it's really hard to get the Pashtuns in Afghanistan to reject the Taliban when you have wavering messages. We're in, we're out. We're going to surge, but we're leaving in 15 months. The last 2 years prior to the president taking office, I almost thought it was criminal to send U.S. forces to Afghanistan with no strategy to actually win there. And now that's changed. I like that we don't know how many troops are going. I think it'll be mission dependent. But what I really like is there's not a timeline set. It's based on success on the ground. And that's the most important thing to commanders because it gives them leverage.
Michael, one thing that I heard him say, which I had not heard in 8 years, is we're in there now to win. We spend a lot of money. The U.S. taxpayer spends a lot of money training war fighters. To the point where I don't know what kind of value that is placed. I don't know what we necessarily could value that training to be. 25,000, 30,000, 50,000. That when we get into some kind of a theater, they're in there to win. They're in there to achieve something. They're not necessarily in there to, walk up and down on some kind of foot duty, handing out candy to Afghani children. We want to win. So I was very gratified to hear that word, such that we know he can't apply a timeline. Because this could take a couple of years. I mean, if the Taliban has a third of the country, which we're hearing that they do, that could take 2 or 3 years, correct?
Yeah, I mean, but the important thing about announcing a change in Afghanistan strategy within your first 8 months as president is it means you have 3 years of continuity. Mm-hmm. And we haven't had 3 years of continuity in this fight since Bush was in office. And remember, when Bush was in office, we literally rolled back the Taliban. We pushed out Al-Qaeda. And then, of course, the Iraq War started, and I don't want to say we took our eye off the ball because we can do 2 simultaneous military operations at the same time, but a lot of the talent went to Iraq, and there was a change. Karzai started, sending messages to the Taliban that, hey, we can talk with you. We're gonna limit what the U.S. can do when it comes to raids, and we're going to advocate on your behalf to get people you want released from prison. But the one thing I'll say about this strategy being announced now, again, 3 years of continuity. When George Bush started the surge in Iraq in 2007, it was in the last year of his presidency. Candidate Obama was already signaling not only to Al-Qaeda but to Iran and their militias that we're out of there. And we saw what happened 3 short years later when the security void actually led to ISIS starting to fill that void, and the destabilizing effect it had not only on Iraq but how it added to Syria's decline in the security situation there too. So this is, you mentioned troop levels. So if the mission is the right mission, winning, so defining winning now is, hey, we're going to kill terrorists. We're not going to nation build. We're going to kill terrorists. And, the Taliban was criticized for harboring Al-Qaeda. Mm-hmm. Now ISIS is there. There are still Al-Qaeda remnants, and Pakistan is offering safe harbor to Taliban and also the Haqqani group as well as the Khorasan group, which is an Al-Qaeda spinoff that prides itself in developing weapons that can bypass airport security. And that's why we've been focused so much on these laptop bombs and things like that. And that's also why we dropped the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan to actually affect these areas where ISIS and the Khorasan group and also the Haqqani network and the Taliban were operating. So the mission is key. What is winning? Winning is denying safe harbor to terrorists in Afghanistan. It's not turning it into a democracy. So I like that we've actually scaled back. So instead of mission creep, we actually have mission refocus, and that's important.
Well said. One of the other things, Michael, that he had mentioned that I was very pleased about, and I'm sure that there was a lesson that was being taught in this White House, and that is on the rules of engagement, because we really didn't have it. We didn't have war fighting rules of engagement in place in Afghanistan. True or false?
Well, we had, so when General McChrystal went in and Karzai started affecting the way the U.S. conducted operations, we actually agreed, okay, we won't conduct raids at nighttime, which is ridiculous. And then we won't conduct raids during the daytime unless we're accompanied by Afghan security forces or police. And what would happen is you'd get intelligence of a high-profile target, and you'd go to the village to go after him, and the police officer, you'd have to wait for the police officer to arrive on the scene, and oftentimes you'd see the police officer driving up on a motorcycle. The police officer would recognize that that's a Taliban house and say, I'm out of here, I don't want to be killed for this, and he would leave, meaning the raid wouldn't happen. Those types of rules of engagement demoralize and hurt our soldiers that are over there risking their lives, because you have to be able to action targets. You have to be able to conduct operations 24/7. You can't have an enemy who can actually take over a town and have a victory parade in the middle of the daytime without fear of U.S. airstrikes or a U.S. combat power accompanying the Afghan National Security Forces. And that's what's been the case. And that's to me is you shouldn't send American soldiers over there if you're not going to do it right, and that's not doing it right. That's doing it wrong.
Michael, we heard about winning the hearts and minds. I mean, you can watch, all kinds of documentaries and all kinds of shows on the Military History Channel, American Heroes Channel, Hearts and Minds and Hearts and Minds. And I think, some of that may have had an effect. But that's not really what we should be in Afghanistan for. Now, when we put these forces in, because I want to kind of get some numbers straight with you, Mattis came out and said that he saw some funky accounting when it came to how many forces that we had there. The number reported had been 8,400, but he came out and said we're closer to 12,000. We got 26,000 contractors. So we're approaching 50,000 if we add in NATO forces there. Would that be closer to the number where we are today?
Yeah, again, it doesn't matter what the number is, because when we surged to 100,000, our focus was on building the Afghan National Army. As we tried to bring it up to 350 to 500,000 troops, meaning that would be the troop level, we started to downsize the number of American and coalition advisors to the Afghan National Military, which made it ineffective. The best success we've had in Afghanistan is with our special operators working with local security forces and actually building up these local security initiatives that deny terrain to the Taliban and protect the population. We've done that well, and then we stop. Mm-hmm. And then we restart it, and then we stop. And that's one of the issues, is that we have a very patient enemy, and they can literally lay out on a calendar. They have a day calendar that says this is when we conduct attacks without worrying about U.S. airstrikes and U.S. military actions. This is the week where we can do something here because we know that the U.S. has now shifted its policy, and we actually give them the winter off. They go to Pakistan, key leaders of the Taliban go to Pakistan, where they have safe harbor, and plan for the spring offensive. So we fight Afghanistan like football seasons. We take the time off, regroup, and then we try to fight them again in the spring. So we recruit Pashtuns, which is what's needed. In order to defeat a Pashtun insurgent group, you need Pashtuns to reject it. So we try to build this capacity in the wintertime. We get all these pledges from tribal leaders and from individuals who join the local security initiatives. They get a paycheck, and then when the spring offensive comes, they're nowhere to be found. And, I don't blame them, because at the end of the day, the U.S. forces are asking Afghans to do very difficult things, and then we send them messages like, I want you to do these difficult things, reject the Taliban, and we're going to go back to our base, and by the way, we're leaving in 15 months, so have at it. Trust is based on proximity and frequency. The more you see me, the more you can reach out and touch me when you need me, the more you trust me. And we did not have that relationship with the Afghan people, and we put their security services in very vulnerable positions because the Taliban basically says, I know where your family lives, I know who you are, and I know the Americans are leaving, so I will have my revenge at a time of my choosing.
Michael, earlier you mentioned Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, the Khorasan Group, and Haqqani. The number was thrown out there that we've got 20 terror groups that are operating between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I saw where the left part of the media is challenging that number. So I said, okay, I'm going to go take a look at this. But that number actually came from Vodal at CENTCOM. Have we, I'm sure CENTCOM has certainly defined all of those. Are you guessing that part of the strategy will be to examine in a priority scale those 20 terror groups?
So the opposition to the president are fact-checking the number of terrorist groups, and because it may or may not be 20, they're saying, therefore, this isn't an important battlefield where we actually have to do something. All that matters is that ISIS is there, that Al-Qaeda is there, and that Pakistan is providing safe harbor to these two premier terrorist groups. Sure, there are other splinter groups, there are other groups there that have sworn allegiance to both Al-Qaeda and separately ISIS, and it doesn't matter what the number is. What it matters is that Afghanistan cannot become a safe harbor, and Pakistan cannot become a place where these terrorist groups operate without fear of being attacked. Mm-hmm. And that's the most important thing.
We're getting some indication that there's some chatter about negotiating some kind of a peace deal with the Taliban. I say that's a fool's errand. Convince me otherwise.
Okay, well, here's the key thing that the president said. So President Obama said, we want to negotiate with the Taliban. He said, we're going to do a surge, we're going to leave in 15 months, and then we want to negotiate with the Taliban. Well, the Taliban says, okay, you're going to surge, so I'm going to go to Pakistan. You're going to leave in 15 months, so I'm going to come back from Pakistan to Afghanistan, and then you're going to reconcile with me, or I'm sorry, you're going to try to talk to me, and I'm going to be in a position of strength because you've already downsized, you didn't degrade us, and we basically held out for 15 months because you told us when you were leaving. This is different. The president said, we're going to kill terrorists, we're going to militarily defeat the Taliban, and then we're going to negotiate with the remnants that want to reconcile. In Iraq, we had reconcilables and irreconcilables. The reconcilables turned into the Sons of Iraq and the Awakening, excuse my my stumble there. And they decimated Al-Qaeda. We basically turned former Al-Qaeda and former Sunni insurgent leaders into anti-Al-Qaeda and pro-U.S. forces. They were reconcilables. The ones that didn't want to reconcile with us were targeted, were put in the ground. And General Lamb famously says, if you want to work with us, great. If you don't, we'll put you in the grave. And he used an expletive when he said that. General Lamb's a British SAS general who worked with, he was Petraeus' operations officer during the surge. And he was instrumental in helping us turn Al-Qaeda out, build this Sunni force. So when we talk about reconciling with the Taliban, it's from a position of strength after we've killed the irreconcilables in the movement, and we reconcile with their, I don't want to say moderate leaders, but we reconcile with those who say, listen, I'd rather not die and I'd rather be part of the political process.
Well said. Thanks for that explanation. One thing I also heard Trump say that I was very, very pleased with, that Hagel and Bob Gates and the rest of them kind of complained about from the Secretary of Defense posture, is that the Obama White House was micromanaging such that they were bypassing the Pentagon and going directly to field operations. And Trump said, we're not going to do that.
Right.
I would think that field commanders and those in uniform in forward operating bases and whatnot were absolutely jumping for joy. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, famously, Secretary Gates went to Afghanistan and saw a phone in the Joint Special Operations Center and said, where does this go to? And they said, the National Security Council. He ripped it out of the wall and said, you work directly for the Secretary of Defense. I don't want you calling back to Ben Rhodes and Susan Rice to ask permission to target. So that's a great thing. The one thing I have been critical of is what I've seen in Iraq and in Syria in the Trump administration, and that is continuing to use U.S. air power and artillery fires to support sectarian forces on the ground. I don't like to. I mean, we spent a lot of time in Iraq, and we never destroyed a city post Fallujah. When we went into Fallujah 0405, we knocked down a lot of buildings. We exited the population, and we learned right then and there, this is not how you defeat an insurgency. This is how you embolden it. If you look at Iraq, Ramadi's 80% destroyed, half of Mosul is destroyed, and we've exited the population into the refugee camps, literally pushed 2 million people, 2 million internally displaced Iraqis into refugee camps, with half of that number being in Kurdistan. That's not what relaxing the rules of engagement should be. We should not have a use of disproportionate force. We don't drop bombs on heavily populated urban areas to kill a couple roaches. And that's what we did in Ramadi for 1,600 ISIS fighters, and that's what we did in Mosul for 4,000 ISIS fighters. Ramadi had a population of 500,000 Sunnis, and Mosul had a population of 2.2 million. You don't destroy cities for 4,000 in Mosul or 1,600 in Ramadi. And we're doing that in Tel Afar, by the way. So I do not want to see Afghan villages destroyed under this new campaign, because it just pushes people back into the insurgency. You know, we basically guarantee that 10-year-old Americans will be fighting in either Afghanistan or Iraq when they're 20. And I don't like that. We got to learn these lessons. The one thing about Afghanistan is that, you know, when I was there in 2002, we had an Afghan leader say, we won't respect you until you destroy a city or destroy a village. Well, the Russians destroyed a lot of villages, and the Afghans may have respected that, but the Russians still got their butts kicked. So it's not a strategy to earn respect or punish a population to do this, and it's not it does not defeat an insurgency. It actually emboldens it. It may not be emboldened in the short term, but it certainly will be emboldened when our 10-year-old American men and women, or boys and girls, become men and women at 20 and find themselves in Iraq and Afghanistan based on a policy that went back to World War II tactics.
Michael,
let's. I apologize.
No. This is your rant. I mean, you know more than we listeners out here. Let's flip over to Pakistan again for a second, because we know that Pakistan has nuclear weapons, and we know that Saudi Arabia essentially paid for most of that, has first right of refusal, and yet we are hearing in the last couple of days that we don't want those Pakistani nuclear weapons getting into the wrong hands. Is that a real concern, or was that just kind of a shot across the bow as a scare tactic?
Well, I mean, it's a real concern. I mean, if all of a sudden Pakistan fell into became destabilized like Syria, it would be a real concern. Right now, it's something that we can keep tabs on, something that we can watch, something that we can identify. I guess the good thing for an intelligence officer and analyst is that we know where Pakistan's facilities are. We know what the indicators look like, so we can see those things. As far as the proliferation of a warhead or the sale of a warhead to a North Korea or to Iran, those are things that we need to be good at, and sometimes I question whether or not we are, based on the fact that requires U.S. sources on the ground that we can trust telling us what's happening, and we've gotten away from our human intelligence capabilities. We have good people in the field doing these things, but again, the best person to tell you what's going on in Pakistan is somebody who is from there, who's a recruited U.S. source that can tell you what's going on, and not necessarily I'm a white boy from Texas. Don't teach me the language and send me to Pakistan and expect me to be effective. Recruit local sources. I mean, when I joined the military in 2018, they taught me Arabic, and I stand out in the Middle East. Sometimes I'm confused for a Syrian or a Lebanese guy, which is good, but more often I look like a Texan.
Well, I did my time in Texas too, if that helps. But when it comes to Pakistan, I don't know that we've had any kind of conversations with the leadership in Pakistan or the ISI in probably the last half dozen years. Is that somewhat correct?
Well, we have they help us here and they don't help us there. They support the Haqqani network. I did some work with the Abbottabad sensitive site exploitation of Osama bin Laden's residence when I was in the intelligence community. And what we don't understand, or what we should understand, is that relationships in the Middle East and places like Pakistan and Afghanistan, relationships last for decades. We always look at the immediate relationship that somebody has. So we look at the ISI director and say, he must be the guy that's harboring Osama bin Laden. Mm-hmm. And we don't think that maybe it's the guy that was in charge 20 years ago that's doing it. And the difference between our CIA and our intelligence agencies is when you retire, you're retired and you become a pundit, you become a TV guy, or you write a book. Yes. In these countries, they are still the senior guy, even if they're out of office. The person that replaces them, there's still a hierarchy there. There's still a position of influence. So you literally had retired ISI officers handling the Osama bin Laden portfolio and keeping it from actual ISI guys in uniform. So it's not necessarily the ISI that's in place, that's currently wearing the uniform and currently in the directorates. It's actually the retired guys.
Well said.
They're the ones that maintain these relationships. They're the ones, that somebody can come back and say, hey, remember when we fought the Russians in Afghanistan together? I need your help. And they honor that relationship.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Pregent, adjunct fellow at the Hudson Institute, obviously an expert in this region, who I think just came back from Iraq too.
10 days ago.
But thank you, Michael, for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience, and come back soon so I don't have to.
I appreciate
maybe
it.
Maybe I don't have to conflict with all the schedulers over there at Fox News. But thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, ladies and gentlemen.
You're listening to Red Nation Rising Radio, the new dominant force in conservative internet talk radio.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you these two 24/7 streams of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. Talk America Radio is a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. Please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. You can contribute monthly or send us a one-time amount. We'll put it to good use continuing to share the American voice. Thank you.
Hi, this is Michel Malkin from CRTV.com, and you're listening to Talk America Radio, the new dominant force in conservative talk radio.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Chris X Radio, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern, on the Talk America Radio Network.
Congressman Alan West joining us.
Well, thanks so much, Chris.
We're talking with Brigitte Gabrielle.
Oh, Chris, I am delighted to be with you.
Ted Nugent is here.
My pleasure, and congratulations with your show. I'm proud to be on it with you, Chris.
Listen to Chris X Radio, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern, right here on the Talk America Radio Network.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, it's Mark Walters from Armed American Radio. You know, for nearly a decade, I've been educating, informing, and entertaining responsibly armed Americans. And during that time together, we've shared some ups and downs, haven't we? Trump's election saved our Supreme Court and no doubt the future of our gun rights for now. But now is not the time to lay down. The enemies of freedom are well-funded and more determined than ever. To keep up with the state of your gun rights, make sure to tune in to Armed American Radio right here on Talk America Radio, the new dominant voice in conservative talk radio.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia. And WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I got Ryan Mauro with us, the terrorism expert over at the Clarion Project. He's out of the tunnel in New York, and I've caught him in between all of these appearances that he's making on Fox News because he's so good at what he does. So thank you, Ryan, for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
You are a busy man. I mean, a busy man. You need a vacation, don't you?
I do, but unfortunately, like a normal vacation, I feel bad taking, like going to the beach or whatever. So the type of places I like to go to vacation are like Iraq, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I saw that.
And that's expensive, so
I saw
I need
that.
to save up for those.
Take a couple of days off, and where do we go? Oh, we'll go over to a war zone in Iraq.
Yeah, that's vacation to me. I mean, it's a weird way of relaxing. 'Cause I always need to feel like I'm accomplishing something, and you know that's just the best way to do it. If I'm at the beach, then I'm focusing too much on what I'm not doing.
I get it. I get it. I think you're a person after my own heart for some, I don't know, some reason. But okay,
I feel
look.
bad for you.
Well, and I'm much older than you too, and I've been doing this a long time. It makes you older fast. But let's talk about Spain here if we can for a second, because when you do some digging, we have this cockamamie cell that has really raised its ugly head, at least going back to 2015. And the Spanish officials have done a couple of intermittent raids, and arrests. They did some in February, and they did some in April, and they even going back to 2015. Why do we keep having these gaps? Why do are we just keep recruiting new guys, or are they just others being radicalized to take their places? How is this working, Ryan?
Well, there's a few different types of gaps that'll happen. The most obvious gap is that you'll have nonviolent but radical networks that grow. And we only pay attention once there's criminal activity or something that's really blatantly advocating violence. And so there'll be a gap between when there is a network being built and then these individual terror cells will come from that, and us noticing that, and then us noticing that there's an actual terror plot underway. So that's one gap. And then the other big gap will be of the pool of the people that you are watching. You have to pick who you go after. There's only so many resources, and the law is a difficult thing to deal with in Europe or the United States. You have to have a lot of evidence to start really going after someone. And so the gap that you'll often see is that someone goes to jail, and it may not be a terror offense, but then they come out, or they're on the radar and investigated, and then the investigation is closed because nothing turns up. And then you'll see a gap in the timeline because they're on the radar, off the radar, on the radar, off the radar. And so those are the different, that's the explanation for why you see these dates bouncing around as you go through the chronology of how these terror cells develop.
Brian, in your experience, when it comes to Spain, when it comes to France, when it comes to Belgium, when it comes to Germany, all of those countries are actually following what I call European Union laws and not laws of the respective country. They've deferred to the higher power of the European Union, which I would argue has caused real problems for the safety not only of Europe but here in the United States, because one, you have the Schengen Agreement in Europe, but we have a visa waiver program with virtually every one of those countries. And so this this ought to be a real elevated situation here, should it not? Or are we not putting the pressure? Well, of course we're not. I mean, this comes down to our State Department. We're not putting the pressure where it needs to go, are we?
I would argue not. When it comes to the issue of the European Union, in order to be a member, you have to take in X number of immigrants. You have to do all of these different things that result in poor policy, but also poor bureaucracy. And so a terrorist or a criminal, as long as they get into Europe and then they get a European Union document, then they can just move around throughout Europe. And what some people hearing this might say is, okay, well, if all the European countries are working together and sharing intel, why does that matter? And the reason it matters is because as you go from one country to the next, there's still a layer of bureaucracy for intelligence sharing that makes it slower. Errors happen because the intelligence agencies are staffed by human beings, so errors happen. And so as you move around more, you increase the chances of error just because you're going through one country's system to the next, and we have to try to follow you through all this sharing. One person sharing with another, with another, with another. On the issue of the State Department, I'm very disappointed with the performance of the State Department under President Trump. And the best example I can give of that would be Qatar, which is this tiny, rich country that finances extremism around the world. And there's really no reason for us to take anything from them. Like, they should never be able to slap us in the face, but they've been slapping us in the face for as long as I can remember. And the entire Arab world ganged up on them after Trump's speech in Riyadh. And the State Department sided with Qatar and Turkey I couldn't believe it. It was this great opportunity to finally put pressure on them and say, look, we can break your back if we want to. And we took their side, and it's just so disappointing.
Well, we have the Al-Udeid, air base there, which we have just, interestingly enough, expanded to have some hugely high-tech, I would guess, CENTCOM East systems in it. So the point is that, we had a chance to kind of threaten Qatar that, hey, clean it up, or we're going to move. But that's we didn't even begin to broach that one.
Yeah, well, the UAE actually came out when this was happening, the United Arab Emirates, and they said, hey, look, we'll host a replacement for that. Start building over here. Get out of Qatar. So that we don't have to deal with the United States constantly saying, don't do anything about Qatar because we have an air base there. But I love the irony of this, because we have this big air base there that protects them from Iran. And yet somehow we're acting like they're holding us hostage. So we build a base in your little country that's weak, and you're acting like we're dependent upon you? And that's how the State Department acts about this. They're like, oh, well, we have a base in this little country. Yes, exactly. To demand that they act like a responsible member of the international community.
We can make Qatar a whole 2-hour kind of thing here, but let's circle back to Spain here for a second, or the European Union. Ryan, do they not cultivate social media and some of these Telegram channels and whatnot to see what the heck is going on like we do? Like we're able to I'm looking at some of these names, Ryan, that go back to 2015. I'm pretty sure they're on our no-fly list or our terror list, but that doesn't mean they're on Europe's, does it?
Not necessarily. There's supposed to be a high level of coordination there, but Congress has done multiple reports into the issue of intelligence sharing and found that it's very much lacking, that the information sharing across borders is very slow. And so they're finding all sorts of logistical problems, but I also kind of think it'll always be that way. Yeah. Sometimes when you're dealing with big bureaucracies and governments that are getting bigger and bigger by every single day, whether it's Europe's or ours, you can come up with ideas to make information be handled more efficiently, but you still have a big bloated government there. And I don't know at what point we simply say, look, there's inefficiency that comes with big government, and that includes the national security apparatus. And while you try to improve it, maybe the issue is consolidation and not having a million government agencies and a million different regulations between one agency to the next.
Yeah, they actually cherish their privacy over there and protect their privacy of citizens in Europe much more so than we do here in the United States, which is kind of an interesting situation. Plus, I would argue that Europeans really rely more on their cell phones than they ever do on landlines. I mean, we invented landlines, and so we're weaning ourselves off of them, but they're way ahead of us in I would say the mobile world, which is then causing yet another issue. But Ryan, we've got FBI in virtually every one of those countries, and I know FBI is collaborating and coordinating and confabbing with the intelligence apparatus of these respective countries, such that we're probably standing there stomping our feet with our hands on our hips, just saying, Spain, Germany, what are you doing? And what are you of the notion that they're expressing some real frustration?
Yes, but I think there's a lot of frustration within the European national security communities also. There's a reason that you keep seeing stories leaked out to the press from Europe. Whenever something is leaked, it's for a reason. So you've got to ask yourself, why is it that you have anonymous Spanish officials, German officials, French officials talking to the press, leaking intelligence to show how bad the threat is? It's because they're trying to get a point across. And that point is that things are really, really bad. and the future is bleak. And right now, when you're dealing with ISIS, keep in mind, ISIS makes a lot of dumb mistakes. They're not popular. They're somewhat reckless. Imagine what we're going to be dealing with if another jihadist group comes along and starts waging war on us that is smarter, more calculated, more calibrated. The potential here for something much bigger than ISIS to arise is really very high. And that's what's on the minds of all the European and American officials when you hear these reports. But the problem with Europe specifically, with the migrant issue, where you have millions and millions, literally millions and millions of people arriving every single year. Germany, I think, had 10 million people arrive last year. It's unbelievable. The issue is that, from a national security and economic standpoint, you have to crack down and control the borders. But if you're going to do that and you're a politician, you have to be willing to commit political suicide. Because when you do it, you're going to have the left over there really upset. You're going to have the migrant communities rise up, cause a lot of destruction. You're going to have the people that are trying to come in causing riots and trying to break in anyway. You're going to cause a crisis, and it's going to be entirely on you. And you have to be willing to jeopardize your entire career and go down as a buffoon for the sake of your country, knowing that the long-term effect of that is worth it, and you may not even be alive to see it.
And you make a very good point there, because it's almost like it comes down to a decision of, do you deal with the rising up of the Islamists in Europe, or do you just keep apologizing to survivors of dead people in these attacks?
Right, exactly. And you're only seeing really the rumblings of the jihadist army that's to come, because again, ISIS is very unpopular. They're tapping into Salafi networks that still largely don't like ISIS. So the radical networks in Europe, yeah, they produce some ISIS members, but for the most part, they'll condemn ISIS and say you're going a step too far. So what happens then when a more skilled jihadist comes along, like an Erdogan type, from the dictator of Turkey, someone that really knows messaging and knows how to handle this and handle Western sensibilities and rallies together those radical communities for action? It's really frightening to think about. And to the point where Spanish intelligence back in 2011 had a report where they warned about, and this is their words, parallel societies and ghettos. That's the quote, parallel societies and ghettos in Spain, being developed by the Salafis, which are like the Qatar Saudi type extremists, with their own courts and their own police forces in the country. It's absurd.
Well, Ryan, you just mentioned 2011. I'm going to go back to even 2001, because, the 9/11 attacks were planned in several locations, least of which was Hamburg, Germany. But we also found out that Mohammed Atta was also in Barcelona. And so we have a frame of reference here to say to these European leaders, hey, or to their intelligence apparatus, hey, you had these people, and this is what happened in New York and at the Pentagon and in Pennsylvania. So I can't believe that we're not putting, and maybe we are, we just don't know it, more pressure. Like, for instance, we have this radical imam that apparently was radicalizing some of these guys when they were in the prison, and then he shows up missing, and as it turns out, we're finding out that he was necessarily in the house that exploded the night before the Barcelona attack.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful story that I would repeat over and over again. If it turns out that he blew himself up, we've got to start taking advantage of these things, because there are a lot of stories and even video of terrorists accidentally hurting themselves, and that's the type of stuff that we need to be putting out there. We don't have a propaganda apparatus. We don't have any type of network for that, and there are a million things that we could do to embarrass them, to shame them, to expose them. It's really amazing to me that this many years after 9/11, we don't have that type of thing set up. When a new album comes out and they have publicists, like the rapper or the rock band will have like publicists, and it's like all anyone talks about. Like, this is the type of thing that America was built on. It's publicity. and we don't do that for ourselves internationally. And I would take a story like that of the imam accidentally blowing himself up, and I would want every terror-inclined population to hear about it.
Well, that's kind of sitting on the knife's edge. That means that maybe more need to be trained better then, right? I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
Well, we have this Tarragona cell that we identified in 2015, or the Spanish intelligence apparatus identified in 2015, and yet it seems to have continued to manifest itself in the last couple of years. And I'm just real stunned that Spain hasn't said, we're going to, put, they don't have a lot of, law enforcement there. It appears, but the law enforcement, I think, gets it, but their leadership is saying, well, we can't do this, we can't do that. We got to just kind of stay with the politically correct thing and deal with it. Yet we've got 4 sets of brothers here that were involved in this thing.
Yeah, and that's normally how it works. It's someone that is radicalized by a family member or a close friend. And you can follow those bonds, very easily as a civilian. The problem is, it's particularly for the United States, can you put someone in a database because their family member was a terrorist? If you're just looking at the data, you would say, absolutely, that's what you need to do. But from a civil liberty standpoint, yeah, they put you in a database, but and we'll have that information in the U.S., but we won't automatically put surveillance on you or anything like that just because you had a family member who's an extremist or a terrorist. But if you look at the data, that's usually how it goes. It's kind of like a tribal thing almost. And I guess that makes sense because a lot of the extremism is coming from the Arab world where tribes still rule the day.
Well, in the case of this cell that we have functioning in Spain, it looks like a lot of them are of Moroccan origin. Does that tell you anything in particular, Ryan?
Not too much, except for the fact that, there's a huge Moroccan population in Spain. And when you look at the Muslim population, it's largely immigrant, largely non-citizens that are in that country. And when you have that many people coming over, it's just the fact is, if you look at social science, of course you're not going to assimilate because you're not surrounded by the Western culture. You just kind of transplanted your own community and put it onto another piece of land rather than becoming part of that new piece of land that you live on. And it doesn't even have to be a calculated thing. It doesn't have to be Moroccans saying, oh, I'm going to move to Spain and I'm not going to assimilate. You don't even need a thought process. Just naturally what happens if you move a huge population from one spot to the next, then they retain their current bonds and their current way of thinking. And the Moroccans actually gave a warning to Spain and the other countries I think it was a few months ago, where they said, look, there has been 3,000 people from Morocco that have joined ISIS, and they're not all killed. They're coming back, and it's going to be easy for them to get into Europe. So I'm interested to see if any of these guys went on that trail.
Mm-hmm. And yet, what was it, a couple of weeks ago, Interpol came out and identified 173 specifically, but, they must have been really bad to hit the Interpol red notices when there probably should be 1,773 of them on there, right?
Yeah, that's a small number. 173, that's nothing when you look at the pool of extremists. Even the pool of people that have been involved with ISIS, 173 is nothing. That would mean they'd have to have really good intelligence on those people being involved in terror activities that they want to carry out as soon as possible. That's more than an ISIS sympathizer.
So if Interpol's got a red sheet on 173 of them, are we trying to find them, or do we know who they are and we haven't even bothered to go get them? Wouldn't be
looking. The Europeans. The Europeans and the U.S. Everyone in the in the national security realm are all looking for these people, especially when they're on that high level of a watch list. It's just finding them, then getting the evidence to prosecute them. All of that's a gargantuan task, and it's really hard to prosecute people. I don't think Americans, it's probably due to pop culture. Most Americans don't understand how hard it is to get the evidence to prosecute someone, to the point where you have to remember, for a jury, the verdict has to not be based on, do you think he did it? It's, did they prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? So you can have a jury that thinks this guy's ISIS. So yeah, probably, but did the prosecutors prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? And that's a really high bar, and so that's why you see it's hard to launch investigations. It's hard to keep them going. Why a lot of the times when people get arrested, it's not on terror-related charges. It is a very tough, time-consuming, resource-consuming effort.
And then when they sentence these guys, they're sentenced to almost nothing. We'll put you in here for 2 years, but you get out in 18 months.
That's because of how hard it is to prove the charges. It's really, sometimes like the FBI will get criticized because they'll let a terrorist be a terrorist up until the point where they give him a fake explosive and they record him trying to set it off. But that's because they have to do that in order to get the charge and to get a guilty verdict. Very often you see these guys getting locked up for things like drugs, lying to police officers, like relatively minor things, because that's the easiest thing to prove. And then sometimes it's a plea deal also. But that just shows you how tough it is, because it's not illegal to sympathize with ISIS. And it's also, if you're talking about, I would like to blow something up, that's really not illegal either. So those big charges that you think would lock away someone for life, those are usually not the charges that they end up being found guilty of.
Where is the complicity of Saudi Arabia in all of this, or has there been?
Saudi Arabia is complicit in that they promote the ideology that creates ISIS. If you look at ISIS magazine and you look at what scholars are citing, it's ones that are like in Saudi books, ones that the Saudis make part of their religious and educational curriculum. And now those same magazines by ISIS will condemn the Saudi royal family and say we need to overthrow them, but still the starting point, the reference point, comes out of Saudi Arabia and also Qatar, but Saudi Arabia is known for being the big one. Saudi Arabia will cooperate with us in destroying Al-Qaeda and ISIS to a large degree because the Saudi royal family wants to stay in power. So at least there's some shared interests there that are good, and we can work with them on Iran. But overall, you're dealing with decades and decades of radical indoctrination, allowing radical religious institutions to operate that are very, very powerful and can't be taken down within Saudi Arabia. And eventually there's going to be a big clash. You have the Saudi royal family on the one hand, that most of them just kind of care about being rich and selfish. And then you have the Wahhabi religious establishment. And then you have the youth that are much more liberal and much more inclined for Western culture. And I don't know how long that balancing act can go on.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure Ryan's probably getting a text message here that he's got to go up here on Fox Business or something again. So we're glad we're able to catch you in between all of these appearances. Ryan Mauro, the terrorism expert over at the Clarion Project. Ryan, thank you. And I'm going to tap you again on the shoulder, because I mean we've only just, this is like a deck chair off the Titanic, isn't it?
It is. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, thanks. More coming with you, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us.
You're listening to Red Nation Rising Radio, the new dominant force in conservative internet talk radio.
You can't handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds AGPT, gas TOT 5-3.
ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I got the distinct pleasure of having a very recent guest back with us, because, I mean, the work he is doing is so timely, and that is Dr. Everett Piper, who's president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. Dr. Piper, you've published your book, which I want you to brag on it, that you are number one in a couple of categories. Tell us about your success there.
Well, thanks for having me on, Denise. Yeah, the book is out. It's been out a week ago Monday, so it's been on the market a little more than a week, and it is ranked number one in 2 Amazon.com categories. It was ranked number 3 in a third category, and it reached number 29 in all new releases at its high point. So it's titled Not a Daycare, The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth. Not a Daycare, The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth.
With the recent events, Dr. Piper, are you even more frustrated? I mean, your book needs to be like mandatory reading for every person that is able to read in this entire country, and I would also say Europe.
Fair enough. Well, yeah, this is, in an interview that you and I did a few weeks ago, I referenced Richard Weaver's 1948 seminal work that's titled Ideas Have Consequences. And I said, what's the point of the book? Ideas have consequences. They matter. They always bear fruit. Good ideas, good culture, good kids, good community, good government, and bad ideas the opposite. And what we see right now is bad ideas coming home to roost. We've been teaching self-absorption and narcissism, and we've got self-absorbed and narcissistic students. We've been teaching victimization, and now what we see is violence and vice. There's a reason that we see what's going on in culture, is because what you teach today in the classroom will be practiced tomorrow in your culture. It's as predictable as the sunrise.
Oh, well, very, very well said. So, I mean, it's a generation upon a generation, because I would argue that once these people get out of this classroom, then it kind of perpetuates itself. That seed is planted, and so then the next, generation after that gets that seed planted as well. I mean, so it's kind of like rolling thunder here, isn't it?
Absolutely. And again, if you go back to the founding of our nation, we were told that our Constitution was made only for a religious people and wholly inadequate to govern any other. What was the point? That we have to educate people in virtue if we expect to be a virtuous, free people. And if you educate people in victimization and vice and vengeance, you're going to see violence, not virtue. We need to recognize that education should be grounded in the time-tested truths of God, those self-evident truths that are endowed to us by our Creator. That's the point of the academy. And without those laws, you will have no liberty. Chesterton told us, get rid of big laws, you don't get liberty, you get thousands and thousands of little laws that rush in to fill the vacuum, because when you abandon truth, you get anarchy, and the only way to control anarchy is tyranny, unless it's grounded in truth.
You just used a word, virtue, and how come that particular word, Dr. Piper, is so missing from our lexicon?
Because in postmodernity, the smarter than thous, the elites, the professors and the politicians have tried to humiliate and embarrass the church and the conservative mind to be silent, because conservatism believes in conserving things. We are conservationists. We believe that there are things like an owl or the tree or the water that should be conserved, because we should be good stewards of that. But we also believe in conserving something else, time-tested truths that are validated by experience, confirmed by reason, and revealed by somebody other than you and me. That's the context for a free people and a free society, the context for a constitutional government, a covenantal community, rather than one that's hierarchical and driven by tyranny and power.
Oh, wow. Well said. Well said. How many debates since your book has come out, Dr. Piper, have you been in that have challenged your position?
The interesting thing is, people have asked me, how's your book, Not a Daycare, being received? 97% of the comments to my original article were positive. Only 3% were negative. But people say, well, who's the 3%? It's the secular world. It's the atheist who is writing me and saying, I don't agree with your politics or religion, but good for you. It needed to be said. It's the church that's writing me and saying, shame on you. The secular world is saying, good for you, because they realize the monster they've created and it's turning around to bite them. It's the church that's calling me up or writing me and saying, shame on you. You're too strident. You're too harsh. You're hurting their feelings. You know, education isn't about feelings. It's about facts. I really don't care what your opinion is when you graduate. And you shouldn't care what my opinion is. I want you to learn something. The truth sets you free, not your opinion.
And you have to go back a long time in history to actually find it, don't you? And then when you get to it, when you see how things are created and launched in history, and over the years it gets distorted, that must give you some major measure of frustration.
Well, go back to Hitler. Why was the 1948 date important when I referenced Weaver earlier? It's because he was writing about World War II. Just a few years earlier, he was referencing Hitler, who said, let me control the textbooks and I will control the state. And Orwell and Huxley were writing at the same time about dystopias that would be created to use education as a means of total power and control. Ideas matter. We need to go back and recognize that our Constitution is grounded in ideas, self-evident truths that every human being knows. The gospel, not the gospel, but the Epistle of Romans, St. Paul tells us it's the truth of God written on every human heart. We do know some things. We know that racism is bad, for example, and that the Holocaust should be reviled. You can't test those things in a tube, but you know them. They're self-evident truths revealed to you by something other than power and politics. They're the principles of God.
Dr. Piper, do you get into, in your travels and in your studies and in your research, the realm of, I would say, foreign influence that is tearing at this fabric?
I don't know. I mean, you could go back to the Enlightenment era when you could argue that it's foreign or not. You could speak of other German philosophers and French philosophers that have influenced post-modernity. But America is drinking the Kool-Aid too. Since John Dewey, we've been drinking this poison, and we've been consuming this carcinogen, if you will. And here's the thing. How do you cure cancer? You don't put a Band-Aid on it. You have to excise it. You have to use chemotherapy on it. You have to stop consuming the stuff that caused it in the first place. We've got cancer of the heart, mind, and soul, and the way you cure it is you stop consuming the terrible ideas, the ideological carcinogens that caused it in the first place.
I have pity on these students that sit in these classrooms. I've often threatened to just go to some kind of a college classroom and ask the professor, can I just kind of sit at the back and watch? But I'm not sure that, one, I would be allowed to, and two, that I could stand it. And I know that you and I, when we spoke last, that, you know, you do some kind of dual teaching with some other professors. Is that correct?
Well, I engage the students because I just spoke in chapel yesterday, where I challenged the students with everything that you and I are talking about right now. I started off our academic year by telling them freedom presupposes the fences of truth. There is no liberty without law. You have to recognize that when there is no pain, there is no gain. You have to recognize the Lord disciplines those he loves, that there's cognitive dissonance in life, that you're not going to be comforted and cuddled here, that we're going to confront you and expect you to learn and grow and become people of integrity and character. We started out our year with that message because that's the foundation to good education rather than safe education.
Safe education. Good point. Are you seeing more of unchallenged and safe education happening out there, in academia?
Yes. You hear this call for safe spaces, and you see it from Berkeley to Brown and across the nation. We want safe spaces. Well, C.S. Lewis told us in the Chronicles of Narnia that the great lion Aslan was not safe, but he's good. So if we paraphrase that, let's suggest this. The great lion of the liberal arts, of the college, of the university, the great lion of the ivory tower is not supposed to be safe, but it's supposed to be good. There's a huge difference between safety and goodness. I'd rather have good education than safe education any day, because good education forces me to grow up. It challenges me. It confronts me. Safe education is just going to coddle me and comfort me, and I'm going to go nowhere in life because there's no reason for me to change.
And I can clearly get an easy A.
Absolutely. Get a participation trophy.
Yes. Have you had an audience, or do you want an audience with Secretary Betsy DeVos at Department of Education?
Oh, I'd love to sit down and talk with Dr. DeVos. I would love to sit down and chat with her, and she may agree with a lot of what I've said right now.
I think
but
she
even
would.
if she disagreed, and I do think she would agree with much of what I've said, but the point of a good, robust debate, a good argument, is that disagreement sharpens each person. As iron sharpens iron, let one man, one woman sharpen another. It's that tension, that dissonance, it's that conflict that causes us to sharpen ourselves and decide who's right, who's wrong. The nature of good education. Hopefully, and I think she would, Dr. DeVos would agree with that.
Do you see people when we're having these discussions, Dr. Piper, that they're talking, but they're talking past each other because it's always somebody finishes a statement and the other person says, yeah, but, so we're just bypassing, we're in separate lanes here and none of them will intersect?
Yeah. Again, why do we do that? It's because we don't believe that here's the Kool-Aid that our kids have been drinking for 20, 30 years. How many times have you heard your kids, your grandkids, or the kids hanging around them say this? It doesn't matter what you believe as long as it works for you. That's nonsense. Of course it matters what you believe. I mean, Hitler believed some things, and we should say that they were wrong. Pol Pot and Mao and Mussolini and Robespierre and Chavez and Hitler, they believed some things, and we should challenge that as being wrong. I hope that we still believe that their ideas, even though they worked for them, are wrong. The whateverism, the moral nihilism, the intellectual nihilism, the nothingism of our culture causes us to sit around and ignore one another rather than having a good, healthy debate where there's actually an answer at the end of the day.
I often hear that the generation that you have before you in a classroom, one of their common words is whatever. And it's almost like they're too lazy. They're lazy to the point where they don't even want to be challenged. Maybe 0.1% necessarily does. I'm sure in your teaching, you are asking for certain kinds of essays or certain thesis. Do you do that? And when they are submitted, are you surprised or disgusted? I mean, how does that, where does that place you?
Well, I get my kids out of the same water, if you will, the same swamp, if you will, I get them out of your culture. I get them out of your churches, your youth groups. So, of course, they come into me with some of these terrible ideas. The question isn't whether or not I get kids that are lazy and in their thinking and buy into this whateverism. Of course I get them at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. But the difference between Oklahoma Wesleyan and the other university across the street is I actually am going to challenge them. I'm going to confront them. I'm going to say your whateverism, your nihilism, your intellectual mush is nonsense, and let me tell you why. It makes no sense. So let's talk about it. I'm not going to accept their intellectual laziness and their complacency. I will actually try to push them beyond that. I'm not going to give them a participation trophy, and I'm not going to provide them bubbles and coloring books and puppies, which is what other universities are literally doing right now. They actually give them counseling centers with those things so that they can take care of their anxiety during finals week. This is literal nonsense. A university should challenge it, not accept it.
It's cultural suicide. And Dr. Piper, we're talking about top universities. I mean, we've got Emory University, Atlanta. We've got the Princetons, the Harvards, the Yales, the Rutgers, the Colgates, the Northwesterns, the University of California. Yeah.
It's an endless list. It goes on. It goes on and on and on. Your point is spot on. From Berkeley to Brown, you have this sequestration of contrary ideas. If Ben Shapiro shows up, they don't like his conservative views, so they shout him down. If a professor shows up at Middlebury, they don't like his views, so they grab the professor's hair, they yank her head backwards to the point she had to be taken to the hospital and be put in a neck brace. All under the banner of tolerance. These people can't tolerate anyone else's intolerance, which makes them the most intolerable of all And they make exactly. It's back to ideological fascism rather than intellectual freedom.
Have you taken a look at some of these other professors in their syllabus? You know, what they're teaching for that quarter or that semester, and picked up the phone and kind of said, "What are you doing?"
Well, I haven't called any of those professors directly lately. I've chosen to confront it via these public commentaries because, you know, at my institution, my faculty actually believe that truth exists, and therefore they're going to share that truth with the students and challenge them accordingly. They're not going to play the politically correct dance. They're actually going to engage in a good, robust exchange of ideas where the conservation of time-tested truths is the goal of the academy. My faculty actually believe in virtue rather than vengeance and victimization, and they teach that. We actually believe in four things. We call it our four pillars: the primacy of Christ, the priority of Scripture, the pursuit of truth, and the practice of wisdom. We think those four cornerstones, those four pillars, provide the maximum amount of intellectual and human freedom ever proven in the course of human history.
It was announced today on the heels of all the nonsense that is going on with taking down monuments and all the conflict in these cities and towns across the country, and with the neo-Nazis and the Antifa and all that kind of thing, that Congress is now going to have a hearing. I want to see if we can get you into that same hearing as a panel witness. One, would you accept? And two, what would be your message?
Well, sure, I would accept. I'm obligated to engage in the market square of ideas, and what better place to do it than in such a hearing? My message would be this. When you teach, I'm going to repeat myself, but I'm going to make it more clear. When you teach victimization to a culture, when you teach everybody in a culture that they're victims, you're going to have white racists that claim that they're the victim of a different race. And they're going to engage in this violence and this vice and this vengeance, this anger that you see, this hatred that you see in the town square. This is the result of a culture of victimization, because victimization by definition is selfish. Virtue is selfless. We've been teaching people to focus on self, their own identity, their own claims, their own feelings, rather than the facts of freedom. We have to recognize that what you see in the white supremacists in Charlottesville is as predictable as the sunrise, because we taught them victimization from the time they were in the cradle.
When you're on your book tour, Doctor, who is your audience?
Well, the audience, you know, it's interesting. I'm gonna turn this to the youth, because I have a lot of people say, I bet these kids don't want to listen to you. Hogwash. These kids are sick and tired of the mush that we've been feeding them for decades. They're dry sponges. They're waiting for somebody to give them the water of truth, and they'll soak it up like a sponge. We just have to have the spine, the courage, the conviction, and the clarity to call a spade and enter into this debate and show them the courage that comes from grounding your worldview in things that are immutable, unshakable, enduring, and true. And they'll grab a hold of it. They're waiting for somebody.
So is your audience the parents, faculty, or potential students and students? Or all of those?
Potential students, it's parents, it's all of them. I think parents are scared to death. Any good parent should be scared to death of sending their kid off to one of these institutions that teaches this pablum. And they shouldn't do it. Stop spending the money. Stop dropping tens of thousands of dollars on the barrelhead to send your kid off to a school where they take pride in teaching them this nonsense. Speak with your wallet. Speak with your feet.
Or the alumni should necessarily quit donating money until, you know, some kind of president takes a hold of all of this, and I would say, Dr. Piper, and correct me if I'm wrong, the types of classes that are being taught, gender studies and I would say history or religion or English or literature. Some part of all of those types of classes need to have a real cleanup, correct?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of the classes are totally worthless because they're driven by postmodern assumptions rather than objective facts. They're driven by opinions, and that those opinions are driven by the power of the professor. by authority top down. It's hierarchical. It's squashing people from the top down. If you don't agree with me, I'll humiliate you. I'll call you out. I'll make you embarrassed until you comply with my ideas. That's terrible instruction. If I have a kid here that disagrees with what I'm saying, I'm not going to humiliate him. I'm going to challenge him. I'm going to force the debate. And I'm going to tell him, as a scholar in this given discipline, I've drawn different conclusions than you, young man. And if he chooses to walk away and disagree with me, then Lord bless him. But I'm not going to lead him to believe that I don't have conclusions. I'm going to say that my scholarship has driven me to the point where I've actually come to some closure on this, and let me share that with you. That should be what education is all about. That's good education.
Dr. Piper, how much blame can we put on the textbooks and the publishers?
They're as compliant as anything. The textbooks, let's put it this way. He who defines the terms always wins the debate. He who defines the terms always wins the debate. Well, who's crafting our terms? Who is crafting our language? Who's codifying our definitions? Well, it's the textbooks. You know, we know from history that cultures are made and cultures are conquered, not so much by bombs and bullets, but by books and blogs and written word ideas. That's what creates a culture or conquers one. Not the bomb and the bullet, but the book and the blog and the idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the publishers and some of those joint authors in the textbooks are probably the scariest thing of them all, because once they're out there forever. And they're in an inventory that will always be used for some kind of reference and a point of going backwards, if you will, if we could ever go forward. You got some classes starting again here pretty soon?
Yep, yesterday was our first day of class at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. We had chapel, and everybody's in full swing right now. So, and we're blessed. You know, people have suggested, I bet your ideas aren't all that popular. It's a challenge, right? We've tripled our enrollment in 15 years because we stand for something. We've tripled our enrollment in 15 years that I've been here because we stand for the exact things that I've described in the last 20 minutes with you. People are sick of buying vanilla ice cream. They'd rather get a bold and distinct flavor. We give them that without apology, and we're not going to change it.
Are you taking a little bit of a different approach this semester quarter than you have been previously, or no? You have it pretty well nailed down.
No, we know exactly who we are. We stand for those four things. It permeates all of our academic life. The primacy of Christ, the priority of Scripture, the pursuit of truth, and the practice of wisdom. You know, Jesus is the Son of God. The Bible is the Word of God. Truth is given by God. It isn't made up by you or me. I'm not going to give you a degree in opinions. And then wisdom, sanctification in our terms, integrity is demanded by God. It's not optional. We expect our students to be integrationists, not segregationists. They integrate head and heart and fact and faith and belief and behavior. They don't segregate things. They don't separate things that are supposed to be integrated and whole.
Ladies and gentlemen, Not a Daycare is the title of the book. I actually handed it off to a dental assistant about a month ago in a dental office because she was pretty desperate with one of her teenagers. And she said, I'll get it back to you in a week or so. I said, no. I said, you pass it on. Dr. Everett Piper, president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, his book is Not a Daycare. Thank you. And good luck. I mean, I'm pulling for you probably more than anybody else I can think of here at this point, and I'm grateful for your time and endless dedication to this.
Oh, thank you so much. I've been honored to be on your show again. Really appreciate it.
All right, good deal. There's more coming your way, ladies and gentlemen, so stay with us.
You're listening to Red Nation Rising Radio, the new dominant force in conservative internet talk radio.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia.
And Don Newen from Cowboy Logic Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go to sleep every night completely fatigued from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place,
then you're simply not doing enough. Join us every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for Cowboy Logic Radio.
Let the restoration begin.
Chris X Radio, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on the Talk America Radio Network.
Congressman Alan West joining us.
Well, thanks so much, Chris.
We're talking with Brigitte Gabrielle.
Oh, Chris, I am delighted to be with you.
Ted Nugent is here.
My pleasure, and congratulations with your show. I'm proud to be on it with you, Chris.
Listen to Chris X Radio, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern, right here on the Talk America Radio Network.
Hi, this is Denise Simon, the host of the Denise Simon Experience. I feel compelled to tell you people that Don Newen is my favorite talk radio host, period. Not Mark Levin, not Rush Limbaugh. I can't do this.
Do it, Denise. Read it. Read it, Denise.
Not Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham, but yep, Don Newen. Cowboy Logic Radio is featuring the ever-stellar, highly gifted Don Newen, right here on Talk America Radio.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio. On behalf of my beautiful co-host, Donna Fiducia, I'd like to express my gratitude to Denise Simon for those kind words. I don't think I could have done it better if I would have written that myself. Cowboy Logic Radio, every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on Talk America Radio. This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
ATA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us here on the Denise Simon Experience. We're going to start off the show with money. I get money. Bad money, good money, tax money. So I have Adam Michael here with us from the Heritage Foundation. And I would encourage all of you to visit the great work that they're doing over there. And they're contributors as they write some summaries for us at the Daily Signal. So Adam, thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Certainly. Thanks for having me.
I know you guys are trying to stay positive over there at the Heritage. And I know that you guys are the most dedicated group of people trying to, impact policy and decisions and stuff at Congress. But when it comes to budgets and tax reforms and regulations and trade issues and all these kinds of things, is the work that you guys are doing mostly over at the Ways and Means Committee? Share with us a little bit of this interaction on how you're trying to influence some people over there, and rightly so.
Yeah, well, you sort of are touching on tax reform, which is the issue that I focus on, and the reason why I'm ultimately optimistic that we're going to see some sort of reform in going into the future is the president has sold tax cuts for all Americans. He's sold getting the economy growing again, and tax reform gets you both of those pieces. It can put money back in the pockets of Americans, but more importantly, it can get the economy growing again. Getting the economy to that 3% growth target, tax reform is the biggest piece of that. And if we can get the right type of tax reform through to really get investment going, to increase wages so that businesses can start hiring again, this is all possible through the right type of tax reform. And so there's definitely a path forward, and it's about keeping the pressure up and making the case that tax reform is so important.
Adam, when we talk about tax reform, there's several things that are on the table. And, I guess Kevin Brady and his committee, they've done some work, obviously, because, we hear intermittent interviews with him. But, is it down to where we're looking at three brackets now? Or does it go beyond that, Adam, such that we're looking at, the corporate rate and, several other of the machinery that, hurts corporations and business? How does that, where are the priorities, I guess?
Yeah, so both the president and the House, the sort of blueprint that the House put out, which is part of Kevin Brady's plan, are on basically the same page, where they want to lower rates for individuals by consolidating tax brackets and then lowering the rates. So we currently have 7 tax brackets, and as you pointed out, the proposal from both the president and the House are to consolidate those to 3 brackets. And part of lowering the rates is also getting rid of all of the additional complexities, getting rid of unnecessary deductions and credits and all the little things that litter the tax code and make it sort of opaque to the average person. This is so on the individual side, all of those things are on the table and are being talked about. And then yes, you're exactly right. The business side of the tax reform debate is incredibly important. That's where we see most of the economic growth. Currently, our corporate income tax rate is the highest in the developed world. This is pushing businesses out of the United States, making it hard for them to invest here, making it hard for them to add additional jobs and grow wages. So lowering the corporate income tax rate, but also making structural reforms to the business tax system overall, so that we can get the economy growing again.
How does Heritage feel about the proposed 3-bracket tax plan?
It's a big step in the right direction. Consolidating the brackets from 7 to 3 is a simplification. It's one less thing that people have to think about when they get a raise. Is this going to bump me up into a higher bracket? They also have proposed doubling the standard deduction, which is part of that. So it's giving a tax cut for everyone across the board, including those that are at the bottom of the income distribution, while also lowering those incredibly high tax rates that are up into the 40% for small businesses that pay through the individual tax code. So it's definitely, we'd love to see one flat rate across the board for everyone, but this is a huge simplification and a step in the right direction.
There are other tax advocates out there, organizations that are going for a much simpler thing. And, we've heard a lot of rumblings about a national sales tax, a flat tax, a fair tax, something that you just, either fill it out on a postcard, which was sold to us during the campaign too, or you just eliminated all these forms and filings altogether, and it's just done at the retail level. Are any of those kinds of things part of the discussions?
Not part of the discussions going on right now in Washington. The sort of terms of the tax reform debate have been are pretty well defined. We're talking about lowering the corporate income tax rate, reforming some taxes on the individual side, but right now we're not talking about completely changing the entire system over to a sales tax or something like that. Right now we're talking about how can we work within the sort of constraints of the current tax code to make it more efficient, less burdensome, and again allow it to get out of the way so that businesses and individuals can do what they do best, and that's get the economy going.
The rumor is that, coming back from August break in September, directly after Labor Day, we're going to have some proposals on the table. That there has been some interaction between the summer White House in New Jersey with Donald Trump and his crowd, talking to, the more powerful people in the House on tax reform. Are you optimistic that something's going to be proposed after Labor Day formally?
Yeah, so those sort of the conversations that you were just describing have been ongoing, and there's already been one joint press release been put out between the House and the Senate and the President, laying out very broad general principles for the direction they're trying to move. And then yes, I think we keep hearing that in early mid-September we'll get additional details about what type of tax reform they're looking at that sort of will add additional specificity to the broad outlines that are already out there, but I don't expect in September that we'll see like legislative text or something that's really that in the weeds. That'll have to wait another little bit probably.
In your travels and in the travels of Heritage through the halls of Congress, who's putting sand in the gears? Where are the roadblocks?
You know, the roadblocks are different for the very different specific issues. One of the big ways we can simplify individual tax paying is eliminating the state and local tax deduction, which is a subsidy from low tax states to high tax states. And by eliminating that, we can lower everyone's tax rate, getting rid of that subsidy to California and New York, while lowering everyone's tax rate. And in that case, the high tax states don't want to get rid of that preference. There's examples like that in sort of every little carve out throughout the tax code. On the business side, there's special provisions for energy and like NASCAR and race horses and you name it. Everyone's got their favorite provision, and each one of those special interests are actively lobbying.
Oh God! I don't know what you guys know over there, and Adam, I appreciate the work that you guys are doing, but when you start looking at what's our tax code, 74,000 pages or something, 75,000 pages,
somewhere around there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that are packed in there, and I would say that there are fines and penalties and regulations. Are any of those things actually being discussed? I mean, we had an executive order that was signed a couple of months ago. For every regulation you put in, 2 have to come out or 5 have to come out, whatever that number is. I'm not seeing enough action in that regard, such that we're not eliminating 74,000 pages down to 70,000 pages, are we?
On the tax side, we haven't seen the movement yet. The Trump administration has outlined a couple Treasury regulations that make it that force businesses to stay here in the United States under our really high income tax system, as possibly reevaluating them as part of tax reform. And this would be a good thing if we could actually lower our corporate income tax rate and get rid of these regulations. That'd be sort of a double benefit for economic growth. But it's really, they're all sort of tied into this tax reform piece, at least on the tax side. And when we talk about draining the swamp and unrigging the economy, it's the tax reform can really do that. Getting rid of a majority of those 70,000+ pages would give the average American the ability to know that the tax code is not being gamed by the people in power.
So let's talk about the corporate entities or the corporate component, where so many of them have figured out that if they move certain components offshore, then they can save them some tax liabilities, and that's what we necessarily know as inversion. We had some discussion about that during the campaign, but we haven't heard much about it since. Are you hearing that that's part of any of these discussions?
Yeah, so businesses are right now in sort of a holding pattern, waiting to see what will come of tax reform. And I fear that if we don't get tax reform, then we might see inversions or these other sorts of business moves to lower their tax liability by moving outside the United States pick up again. For the time being, it's that businesses are mostly waiting. But what pushes businesses to invert, to move overseas to lower their tax liability is how high our corporate income tax rate is. We currently have the highest rate in the developed world. We also tax the worldwide profits of our corporations. So rather than just taxing income they earn here in the United States, we lay claim to income that they earn in any other country. And so if an American company is trying to compete with a Canadian company, then the American company isn't on a level playing field. The Canadian company is paying lower taxes in Canada, but that American company has to pay the high U.S. taxes on that income as well. And so by moving to a territorial system, getting rid of that worldwide taxation system, lowering our rates so we're competitive with other countries around the world, and some other structural reforms on the corporate side, these are the true remedy to bring businesses back here in the United States and certainly stop them from leaving.
Just where I wanted you to go. So that was a good segue to the next question here, and that is, do these corporations have any kind of access or any kind of testimony that they're giving to the Ways and Means or any of these other committees, such that they're saying, we are having a terrible time competing globally because our competitors in other countries don't have to put up with what we have to put up with? I mean, are they making that case at all?
They certainly are. They've been making that case for quite some time, and that's one of the reasons why I'm optimistic that tax reform may actually move forward. Is there's so many pressure points on our broken tax system that hasn't been updated in 30 years that to not reform it would just be a travesty for both individuals and businesses. The one thing I like to point out when we're talking about the corporate income tax is that it's not just businesses that are feeling the hurt. It's what we know is that individuals, workers, through lower wages, often pay a large portion of the corporate income tax. The business just passes that cost along to workers and investors primarily, and because capital is mobile, because investors can invest anywhere in the world, and workers have to be here in the United States, lower wages are often the result of high corporate taxes. And so lowering the corporate income tax not only will bring businesses back to the United States, will allow them to create jobs, but it will also allow them to raise wages here in the United States, which is a benefit for all Americans.
Maybe kind of sort of, because I want to throw you a curveball, because a lot of corporations and industry, I would argue, are getting subsidies for various and sundry reasons. I mean, they're being out taxed, if you will, so they have to move, and then they're turning around and saying, well, we need some kind of, the agriculture industry is getting subsidies, meaning, the big corporations, the big farms are, oil is, and so it's like if you watch the right hand, the left hand's doing a bunch of other nonsense. So are subsidies part of this discussion too, Adam?
There's certainly tax subsidies in the tax code that are on the table, and those, if we're to believe the outline that the House has put out, all of those should be on the table, and that's a big part of the savings of being able to lower the rate is we can get rid of all those special carve-outs, special provisions for green energy, for wind, for solar, for nuclear, for you name it. There's a special provision, and use that savings to lower the rate for everyone, and that not only treats everyone more fairly, but it also gets rid of the government picking winners and losers in the economy, which we know is not a good way to stimulate growth and get the economy humming again.
Well, I mean, they're clearly in part of the government's part of is in business that doesn't need to be in, and that I don't think a lot of that discussion has actually happened. We heard about winners and losers for a while, and then that whole topic kind of went away. If you have got some people that you could pinpoint that are hurting this argument about tax reform in Congress, who are they that we need to kind of go maybe do a tweet up with and say, hey, Congressman X, why this, why that? Are you able to kind of pinpoint some of these people?
I'm not sure if I'm able to pinpoint specific people, but anyone that is claiming that tax reform has to be revenue neutral and has to fit all of these sort of arbitrary constraints that politicians tend to put around tax reform is making the process more difficult. Really, when we're talking about tax reform and really tax cuts for every American, we should be looking at both sides of the ledger. Taxes don't need to be paid for. It's spending that's being paid for. And we didn't get $20 trillion in debt because we haven't taxed people enough. When we're talking about tax reform, we should be focusing on lowering tax burdens for everyone across the board and then also considering what we're spending that money on, and is it truly a taxpayer first look at federal spending. And so, and when we hear politicians talking about revenue neutral tax reform, it means that we're not actually lowering taxes for anyone. All we're doing is sort of moving the pieces around.
Yeah. Now, revenue neutral, and then it comes down to spending. So spending is part of this dialogue, I would imagine. And yet one of the three areas that I think that I don't know, I want to say may suffer, but are earnestly being defended as far as spending, and that the tax revenue has to stay where it is and probably even go up, is Social Security and health care. And so the other one, and the big one, is interest on the debt. Does that just kind of convolute the argument about the tax code, or are these things, those three things, a viable part of the debate?
So the way that Congress is going to pass tax reform is through using instructions in the budget through reconciliation, which gives them an easy path forward in the Senate, requires that they look at all of these things holistically. And so when they're talking about how much revenue to bring in with the tax changes, they should also be considering those out year spending pieces. What is this going to do to how much interest we have to spend to finance all of this, and where is the rest of the money being spent? And there are many different mechanisms they can use to put constraints on that in sort of the out years of the budget to make all of the numbers add up. They just have to be willing to tackle those hard questions.
Yeah. Well, you know, the work that you guys are doing over there at Heritage is excellent work. I think all of us out here outside the Beltway are going to say, okay, we're going to get tax reform and this is going to happen, but we're looking way out to 2020 or 2024. I have a feeling that, you know, a lot of what necessarily will be proposed is not something that we could wrap our arms around, such that it be retroactive for 2017 or begin in 2018. It gets pushed out. Is there a chance that we're going to be kind of sold a package of goods from the outset that isn't quite really what it really is?
I would hope that tax reform isn't retroactive. That's sort of what we want to be doing is being forward looking. How do we get the economy going as we look forward? How do we stimulate additional investment? How do we get businesses to come back here? And that we do all that by being forward looking. I'm hopeful that the 2018 will bring with it true tax reform, and it's really important that we don't just sort of assume that the tax reform will get done, but it's about making the case as to why we need tax reform and why it's so necessary for the average American. And that's, by some estimates, the tax reform packages that have been proposed could grow the economy by up to 10% over the next 10 years. That's 7% higher wages at the end of that time. If you're making $50,000, that's an additional almost $4,000 in your pocket. And these are real benefits to every American. And that's where we should keep our focus.
All right, one last question for you, because everybody has come to hate Paul Ryan, and you know, as the leader of this House. And I would say, in this particular case, he's really a financial numbers wonk, and so I think that he probably wants this just as much as a Kevin Brady or the entire tax-paying population. Do you see that he is in an aggressive posture to get this done, or do you think that he's going to have to kind of capitulate with the other members of the House and the other committees?
You know, he is definitely dedicated to tax reform. He had Kevin Brady's job before Kevin Brady was part of on the Ways and Means Committee, so he's gotten his hands dirty and really looked into the tax code, and he's committed to true reform. And and we've seen that, and I definitely I think that he's committed. He's going to be a big part of seeing this through, and that's sort of my optimistic take.
Well, I tend to agree with you. I think he gets it probably more than really anybody else. He's been real dedicated to this for a very long time. I'm just kind of wanting to lay the groundwork out there that he's not going to be the obstructionist on any of this. Do you see that as being an accurate statement?
Yeah, I think that he's about finding the path forward and getting sort of all the different voices to communicate, and we're seeing that. We're seeing the Finance Committee in the Senate, the Ways and Means in the House, representatives from the administration all have been communicating and talking about getting on the same page, and I think that's a really a good sign that they're all at least having a dialogue and figuring out where they agree and working through the places where they may disagree.
Well, there's some pretty good lanes here, one-way traffic I see that, that are heading towards this exit where they've got something in hand. I just need to, we're all very skeptic out here. So we want to share in your optimism, Adam, and
please do. We need more optimists in the world.
Are you giving us listeners out here some kind of marching orders? Do we need to be, who do we need to be calling, and who do we need to be tweeting in order to gain some additional traction here if possible?
Yeah, well, you can learn more at heritage.org. Because of our tax status, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to tell you exactly to go tweet at specific representatives or how to specifically to get engaged beyond that, but definitely keeping pressure up is incredibly important, and tax reform won't get done unless people are really excited about it. So keeping those conversations going is incredibly important.
Safe answer, Adam. And a good one, I might add, but that's acceptable. Well, thank you, Adam Michael, for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Great work over there at Heritage, and keep up the good work with all the contributors who are doing the same investigative stuff at the Daily Signal. We really want to have some kind of a win here in 2017/2018. And, if it looks like some kind of other plan for Obamacare is going to be somewhat delayed, maybe we can embrace this one. So thanks for your time, and come back again when we know that we can gain some more traction. We appreciate your time.
Definitely. Thanks for having me on.
All right, good deal. Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. There's more coming your way.
You're listening to Red Nation Rising Radio, the new dominant force in conservative internet talk radio.